Have you given any thought to contributing to the Melt? It's easy to do. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. It helps to keep the magic happening here at the Melt. So I encourage you to karmically entangle yourself with the Melt today by subscribing monthly for less than the price of a container of goatee wax, or a prosthetic pinky, or a half stick of DMT butter, or an inflatable casket, or the shrunken head of an Atlantean supermodel, or a woolly mammoth's merkin, or a crystalline replica of Baba Yaga's hut, or a capsule of Sasquatch dander,
This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
This is a special show on a variety of levels. The first one being that our guest is none other than dot connector extraordinaire Chris Knowles. The second one has to do with the subject matter, which will eventually lead us to former Cocteau Twins vocalist Elizabeth Fraser. The third is how the subject matter relates to Hunter and I, and how we met, which has to do with our guest. I summarized some of this when I first had on Chris Knowles about a year and 8 months ago on episode 37, but I'll go over it again as it directly relates to the subject matter in this show. Hunter had befriended me on Facebook years ago when I was still on there because I had made a documentary, and therefore a Facebook page about that documentary, about a late friend of ours, even though she and I really didn't know each other, but our circle of friends overlapped back in mid-80s Kansas City. Well, we didn't have any direct contact with one another until a few years after that, when she posted a photograph of Liz Fraser and Jeff Buckley. And I had just recently listened to an episode of the Higher Side Chats with Chris Knowles as the guest, and the subject matter was Liz Fraser and Jeff Buckley, and all of the intricate synchronicities between those two and many other things. So I commented on the photo that Hunter posted with a link to that episode, the Higher Side Chats episode, and asked if she'd known about any of that stuff that they talked about. Well, that comment led to an online exchange, which led to many long phone conversations, and then an airline ticket for Hunter to visit me, and her eventually moving to Lawrence, where we now live together. So we're releasing this episode on our 3rd anniversary, which also happens to be the birthday of my mom, who passed away just this last April. And for this episode we are releasing on this day, we are speaking with Chris Knowles about none other than Elizabeth Fraser and Jeff Buckley, by way of Astroworld, the controversial music event where Travis Scott performed on November 5th, which many have claimed was a satanic ritual sacrifice. I start off the conversation by asking Chris whether or not he thought that there might be some satanic shenanigans afoot.
Well, I think, Satanism is like the huge red herring for stupid people for stupid assholes who just can't tell the difference. They don't know anything. So like they'll see something that's obviously evil and dark, and they just think it's Satanist. And I always tell people, it's just like only dumpy pedophiles are into Satanism and like rich weirdos. You know what I mean? It's like Satanism is for freaks and losers.
True.
People who make this stuff happen, they have a much more sophisticated occult belief system.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you hear the word Satanism, just tell people to shut the fuck up and learn what's actually going on in the world. Seriously,
Oh my God, I love you. I just have to say that out loud. You are amazing.
Thank you.
Great way to punctuate this interview in the beginning.
Right. Thank you. So the symbolism that I was working from, seems to be very specific to me, and it's I saw it as a watcher ritual. First of all, let me just preface this by saying, I legally or I can't speak to what these people who produced this thing were thinking,
sure,
or what their intentions were. I mean, this is obviously just speculation on my part.
Absolutely.
But if you look at a lot of the imagery, I'm looking at this, this rather crude handbill that they created, and it has these two hands with eyes in them, and then there's this mountain with this sort of portal and like things walking through the door. When I saw this, to me, it was just clearly watcher symbolism. And, this is something that there's a group of people I think they're in Missouri, but they're called Skywatch TV, and, they're a Christian group, but they do a lot of real research into the ancient stuff. And I just did an interview with one of the main hosts there, and we both sort of agree that the symbolism that we're seeing has to do with the watchers, and it has to do with a very specific and very strange theology where the watchers from First Enoch are kind of like they're the good guys, and they were imprisoned unjustly. So they were said to come down on Mount Hermon, which straddles Syria and Lebanon. And when you see this big mountain there, that seems to be a pretty clear symbol to me. And then you see these big giant hands with the eyes. And, one thing that I've really come to believe is that when you see a lot of this eye symbolism, that it's the watchers, it's signifying the watchers. A lot of the one-eye stuff, I mean, this is the problem with a lot of the symbolism, because at least a lot of it's garbled, a lot of it's just like stupid people just doing nonsense. But, the one-eye symbolism really starts off, I mean, I can't speak to what everyone using it is intending, but I believe that it's Algol, which is it's the demon star. The name comes from Ra's al Ghul, which is the demon's head. And it's the eye in the asterism of Medusa in the constellation of Perseus. And Perseus connects to Mithraism and all this other kind of stuff. So all this stuff really kind of ties together. But really what we're seeing here, and I think the symbolism speaks pretty clearly to it, is this whole idea of the watchers being imprisoned in sort of like a dimension within this mountain, within Mount Hermon. Because, they were said to have, come down from heaven onto Mount Hermon, but there are also some versions where they were imprisoned inside it. Rather than, the abyss is the ocean, so, and that's where we get to the whole, like, things with Lovecraft and so on. But there is this school of thought that says that they were imprisoned inside Mount Hermon. And, if you look at the symbolism, we just see this stuff over and over again, related to this. And, for instance, the first Astroworld, which I believe was 2 or 3 years ago, the poster is like a giant skeleton. So it's like the giants, the Nephilim, and then there's this roller coaster that's sort of, going down,
Yeah.
down into the abyss. So the symbolism seems to be pretty clear. And it really speaks to this very strange, I don't know if it would be almost like a subset some of these belief systems, but it is this belief system that the Watchers were the good guys. They were unjustly imprisoned, unjustly, falsely accused, and they need to be freed from their prisons so they can, take control of the world and, teach us to be an intergalactic civilization and all this, total nonsense that people still believe in.
Would that be the same thing that some people call the Nephilim?
Well, no. So the Nephilim are the children of the Watchers. So
okay.
In Genesis 6:4, there's the whole idea, the sons of God come down and they find the daughters of men to be pretty hot, and then they impregnate them, and then they create a race of giants, the men of renown, the heroes of old, so on and so forth. Nephilim, Raphaim, there are a number of different names that they were known by. So, so I guess there's this whole idea that if the Nephilim, the Watchers are allowed to return and allowed to sort of transhumanize us through some sort of genetic bonding, that, we'll become this super race of X-Men and Avengers and so on, and everything will be terrific.
Interesting that you mentioned the mountain, because the stage set looks like a fucking mountain. There were eyes all over the...
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah. It's a mountain with a portal in it. So the rings, there's a double meaning there. So there are some stories, all this stuff is apocryphal, but there are stories that the entrance to the mountain, had a series of rings. But that also ties into the, the rings of hell in the Divine Comedy by Dante. So, it's very sophisticated symbolism. It's not like your dopey, 80s metal band Satanist crap. It's much more subtle and sophisticated than that. Even though we also have the obvious things like the inverted cross and so on. But that could be, it depends what angle you're looking at it. If you're the Watchers coming from the portal, you don't see it as inverted. You'll see it as, a standard kind of crucifix. But there was a lot of symbolism that, very dark and sort of, stuff that wouldn't be out of place at a Marilyn Manson concert or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, I don't know how much of this Travis Scott is even aware of. I don't know who was designing this. I don't know who was putting this on. But, just my reading of it is that it's not just, stupid Satanist crap. And just the whole idea that it's Astroworld, right? Because that ties into like the star worship and, I've done a lot of work showing that a lot of these things that people have been puzzling over for millennia about the Book of Revelation, that it's all pretty clearly star maps, that if you just follow the descriptions of these sort of chimeric beasts, that it's clearly describing, this trip through these constellations. And my belief is that was to, it's like a time code. But so you have that Astroworld, but there's also the interesting thing that the Astros were in the World Series again this year. And they were in the World Series after the Highway 91 Harvest Festival situation in Las Vegas. And there are a lot of parallels to that as well. But there are a lot of layers here. When I saw the footage when they started, the people who were collapsed or were suffocated or whatever, when they started just pulling bodies or people who were injured, you saw Travis Scott up on a pedestal, and this is another symbolism that I've been looking at a lot. The adoration of the Watchers on the pedestal. Semyaza and Azazel and so on. That they're put on a pedestal and so on. So he's standing on a pedestal watching this, but he just seems to be like almost in a daze.
Yeah.
He almost seems like he's in a trance or something. as this is all going on. And, you know, somebody had made the rather snarky comment that, like, you know, he's not even singing. He's just, you know, miming to a backing track. And he didn't want people to, you know, if he stopped singing, or if he appeared to be stopped singing and you still hear the singing coming through the PA system, you know, it's going to give the game away.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't know. It's all very weird. I can't imagine, you know, musicians don't tend to be super sophisticated when it really gets to advanced symbolism. So I don't know who's designing all this. So
you think that maybe this whole event and the symbolism involved could have been just using Travis Scott as, I mean, somebody who's obviously very popular, somebody who is known to put on shows that sometimes borderline on chaos, and there's injuries, and you know, he's asking people to kind of what does he call it, rage. So he's kind of inciting this sort of bacchanalian intensity. So do you think that maybe somebody was orchestrating this and Travis was just one piece of the puzzle that just kind of brought everybody to that central place?
Well, here's the thing. I don't know when this was made, but there was a video made, and it was it Minecraft? It was in
Fortnite.
Okay, so he did this video, and he's like basically a giant coming out of the portal, you know, and there's this big portal opening up in the sky, and it's pretty much exactly what I'm talking about, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's all right there, and it could not possibly be more explicit, you know? So I think that with that's sort of my smoking gun, you know? That's kind of like my argument ender, that this is about, you know, the Watchers, and he's the Nephilim, he's the giant, you know, that's the end result of this invasion, so to speak, you know, this interdimensional invasion. But, you know, these hip hop people and so on, you know, even some pop people, you know, they've been playing around with the symbolism for like, you know, a good 15 years now, at least, you know, all this kind of esoteric and occult symbolism. And it's just getting to the point where, like, you can play with that stuff, you know, but you're doing it on such a scale and that you're influencing so many people that it's going to eventually kind of take over, and it's going to do what it wants, and it's going to behave like it wants, not how you think it should behave.
Yeah, exactly. Like getting out a Ouija board and thinking that you're just going to, you know, talk to a goofy spirit, and you end up in The Exorcist.
Well, I mean, that's an example, but I know it's just, you know, the problem is that we've been under this sort of spell, you know, this whole materialistic, secular, atheistic, reductionist spell for so long. It's like, oh, you know, just go ahead and play with that stuff. It's, you know, it's just symbols. It doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't do anything.
Novel.
And that's exactly why, you know, in that kind of environment, when this stuff is just broadcast, that it becomes ubiquitous, it can really take root. It can really take root. And, you know, a lot of the symbolism is very old, and it's very potent. And, you know, people were very careful about this stuff for a very long time. You know, the reason it was called a cult is that it was like, you know, that stuff, you know, in the old days, they would have the dirty magazines behind the counter at the 7-Eleven or whatever. Yeah. You know, it's kind of like that. It's just like, oh, yeah, maybe you don't want to really play around with this stuff. We're going to just occult it underneath the counter here or whatever, you know?
So it's almost like you're saying, Chris, that your intention doesn't really have to be aligned with the symbolism, that the symbolism has its own intent and its own energy behind it. And people that maybe have low energy that are using these symbols don't really have the respect or the understanding of the possibility that using these symbols could actually move some energy.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it. But I also think there are people, what I call the sorcerarchy, at the sorcerer level, who, very much seeding this stuff out there.
Right.
In the same way like a pusher will give away,
the first
samples,
hit.
free samples.
Right.
Yeah, until you get hooked or whatever.
Right.
So I think that it's a very complex and multi-layered situation. But like I said, people were very careful about the symbolism for a very long time. And I'm not just talking church people, I'm talking like magicians. People who were practitioners. They didn't just screw around with this stuff and just throw it out there willy-nilly like you see today. They were much more circumspect about that. And I think that we're paying the price for this kind of carelessness in a lot of ways.
Well, it's like using the Lord's name in vain. Like saying Jesus Christ, you're actually calling in that spirit. So if you are using, that's saying that words have power and that symbols have power, and that if you are tuned into that power, you can kind of move with that stream. But if you're not, that stream can move you.
Well, it's going to move you whether you're in tune with it or not. I mean, it gets to the point, one of the sales pitches for ritual magic and sorcery and stuff is like, well, you'll be able to control these forces. If you work hard enough and you learn enough that you'll be able to call up these demons or whatever and control them. It's like, no.
Right.
No,
yeah.
That's never how it works. It's just like it always ends badly. It always ends badly in one way or another. And, particularly when it's done at this scale. All right. So say you have like a ritual magician working at a certain level, right? It's almost kind of controlled. But once you get to this massive scale, we've got 100,000 people in the stadium bearing witness to this stuff, and the drugs and the lights and the sound. I mean, it all sort of starts to affect you, and it starts to sort of open up certain parts of your consciousness that become receptive to this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of sound, a lot of people were talking about this sort of this subsonic frequency that was played. I don't know whether it was leading up to the show or in between the acts or what, but it was like this subwoofer, but a sort of a pounding or a pulsing at the same time too. People talked about feeling it in their chest. I think several people talked about fainting or having friends that fainted. And that's pretty intense too. I mean, that's some sonic magic that can just work itself right to the core without any sort of message behind it.
Okay, this stuff has been worked on by the military for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I mean, one of the things that I believe is that, do you remember, I don't know how old you guys are, but back in the early 70s, there were all these stories about like The Exorcist, like people going to see The Exorcist and they were fainting and they're throwing up and all this kind of stuff. And, what I believe is that wasn't because it was a scary movie. I think they were field testing the sonic weaponry in the movie because they would have the perfect excuse. Oh, they weren't really being tested by, this military equipment. They were just frightened by the movie. So they were throwing up and fainting and, whatever.
Exactly.
Because they reran the film a year or two later, and it didn't have the same effect. So I really think that probably they were testing out this, or maybe they don't even need to test it out. Maybe they're just employing it at this place.
Yeah. And I heard some of it in the background of some people's videos, TikTok videos usually, and it sounded pretty malevolent. It sounded pretty intense. I can't imagine hearing that sound so loud. Like it almost seemed like a fucking experiment.
Well, see, this is one, I'm always talking about the rituals, right? And one of the things that I find so troubling about the rituals is that I know where they originated, right? Where they really originated. Because if you look at the symbolism and stuff, it kind of speaks to that. And it's really ultimately about, the old human sacrifice rituals. They were amended and they were sort of watered down as time went on, but that's really where this is all coming from. It's all coming from human sacrifice rituals. So when you look at all the symbolism, a great example is Burning Man, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody knows where that comes from. They don't hide that. But it's just like, it's almost like you can sit around and drink near beer, like O'Doul's or something, for so long before you're like, I think I want a real beer now. Right. I think I'd like the real thing. And that's, I'm just convinced that we've already seen it on a clandestine scale, and that in the future we will see it openly. This will be an openly practiced. They'll do it on criminals or, whoever is deemed to be expendable.
On one hand, it's kind of ingenious to if indeed Travis Scott was just sort of a player in this and not really that aware of what was actually taking place. I'm not talking necessarily about the deaths, but about all the symbolism and the energy and the intent. It would almost be ingenious because from what I've heard of his music, it doesn't lend itself to that kind of vibration at all. It seems almost very lifeless and soulless, and tons of auto-tune, which
the whole show was auto-tune. I was like, how can people listen to this? I can't stand that. Yeah, he's also sort of one of the little playthings of the Kardashian witch family. Yes. the coven of witches, that familial coven of witches that tends to destroy the men that they come in contact with. Kanye seemed to get out with his hide intact. He had to barely. He had to become born again to get away from their witchcraft. But I don't think that Travis Scott is so lucky. And this whole thing. I don't know if it would end his career per se, but he's gonna be dealing with so much hassles and headaches for so long because of this. So it almost seems to me like he's part of the symbolic sacrifice as well,
Exactly. Sure. Because if he is complicit, if he knows about it, then he has to maintain the lie. But if he doesn't know about it and he's just kind of used as a bad actor in that scenario, then he doesn't really have to lie because he doesn't know what the lie is. He just thinks he's in this kind of extremely orchestrated, like over the top production without understanding, what the nefarious subtext is.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that.
So then, okay, if this is a watcher ritual from your speculation, what would this ritual be seeking to do you think? What would a watcher ritual, what would a goal of that be?
Well, the point of rituals is the ritual. I mean, these rituals are perpetual. They would, say like in Solomon's temple, they would have the burnt offerings every single day. You know what I mean? It's like sure. Rituals were carried out in the ancient world, wherever you were, on a daily basis. So it's not necessarily it's like a magic trick or a magic spell.
Sure.
Rituals and workings can be the same, but they can be different. I think, to me, what I see in this personally is I just see it's just like seeding this symbolism. And it always starts out, when this stuff really starts to enter the mainstream, it doesn't start out the way you think it does. It doesn't start out obvious or open, or, people will go, hey, guys, hey, kids, why don't you worship the Watchers? The third of the host of heaven that are imprisoned in the abyss. Hey, man, why don't you pray to them and they'll give you whatever you need. And all you have to do is help free them from the abyss. And don't you want to free them? It's like all angel cops are bastards too, man. They were just thrown in the abyss. They're like unjustly accused and all this. It's not necessarily like that. It's just like, just getting it going, it's this stuff gets fed into the mainstream, and then it's just repeated. It's, rituals are, I like to say rituals are habitual, they're, they become mandatory, really. And it's just a question of what liturgy is being practiced then,
So do you then with this ritual call for sacrifice, do you think that those deaths happen for a reason?
Well, again, it's not for me to say, but I'm very troubled by what I see. I'm very troubled by the combination of the people dying and the symbolism itself. Yeah, that's very troubling to me. And, this is another thing where, like, the whole Las Vegas thing, it's just, anybody is just going to look at this and go, oh, I know what symbolism that is, it's like, they're not fooling me, having this mass shooting type event in front of a giant sphinx, I think people really kind of get that, or, the giant pyramid. It's like, I don't think people really need to do a lot of math to sort of put that all together.
Well, it's interesting, too, because there were at least a few reports of somebody going around and injecting people, including a security guard that was working that night, who actually passed out from the injection. So, and then the deaths weren't labeled as, the sort of deaths that would be linked to asphyxiation or, just being trampled or something like that. They were all heart related. So if this indeed was a sacrifice, then it would almost make sense that, they didn't want to rely on whether or not an actual death would occur because of the chaotic environment and the possibility of violence or overcrowding. So let's push it and send somebody out to inject some of these people, and it will be under the cover of that environment, which will give it a perfect situation to blame those deaths on. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, yeah, that's very similar to what I was talking about with the Exorcist situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just the same kind of deal. But listen, there have been trampling incidents or whatever, death at festivals. There was that famous Who concert in 1980. And then there was also the Pearl Jam at Roskilde in Denmark, and I think that was 2000 or 2001. So these things can happen, but I don't know if they can happen with this kind of very specific and weighted symbolism on their own.
Interesting that you mentioned Pearl Jam too, because Travis in one of his videos, I think for the Astroworld album, was wearing a Pearl Jam t-shirt.
That's correct, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe even for the same album that tour where the deaths happened occurred, which is, I don't know. Just interesting. A lot of little interesting facets. I think it's interesting.
I stopped paying attention to Pearl Jam like in 1994 or so.
I stopped.
Or 1995. I haven't really kept up with the Pearl Jam discography,
Yeah, I never started, so I never stopped. Another interesting thing about all of this too is how the mainstream media is behaving in a way that I can't remember it behaving this way, in the sense that it's kind of got this "there's nothing to see here" attitude as far as these speculations about this being a satanic ritual or something like that. It's not like they're just ignoring it like they usually do to conspiracy theories before COVID came along, but it seems like they're making a concerted effort to tell you that that's not the case, which is suspect in some strange way.
To me, it's reverse psychology, because, everybody knows the mainstream media are scum and liars. So they're just going to believe the reverse of anything they say anyway, right? I mean, who believes, it's like, who believes the mainstream media except for like old grandmothers, I mean, nobody pays attention to it. So, and you're particularly kids, are you kidding me? Like they're just, the media is just adding gasoline to the fire,
Chris, I beg to differ. I'm in college right now, and the mainstream media, Snopes, CNN, these are the bastions of truth to college students. This is what they're saying in our discussion boards. When asked where they get their news, they say CNN. I mean, it's scary. It's scary to see who actually does look at this stuff, and it's because there's a zero discernment. They're not really looking beyond whatever the official story is, because it's easier just to accept the box that's talking, or whoever the pharmaceutical puppet is. It's easier to buy that than actually sit down and really critically think about what's being said. So I would say that they have a larger audience than we would probably want to admit, because people just don't do the level of research that you do. So that's how these people stay in power.
I would say the people that, I think the people that's a self-selecting group. I mean, you're dealing with like the future managerial class, and they have to pay attention to what the media is saying, or otherwise they'll be drummed out, they'll be kicked out of the club.
Sure.
That's a certain demographic that I totally agree with you, but I'm just talking like generally, particularly like people who listen to Travis Scott don't care what CNN has to say about anything,
Right.
People who are on TikTok, people who would be spreading these rumors, they're not going to listen to CNN. What, like Brian Stelter, like this weird fat potato telling them what to think with this little fat squeaky toy? They're not going to pay attention to that. You know what I mean? So, I mean, your point is well taken, but I'm telling you that that's a self-selecting group.
Yeah.
And that's just, that's part of the stratification. But, I guarantee you that people spreading these stories or listening to these stories on the internet or on wherever, they don't give one crap what CNN or the New York Times or any of those people have to say about anything.
You're right.
I think your dog agrees too.
Yeah. He's been quiet, and then all of a sudden he's been quiet for like 3 hours, and then he's like decided like it's time to start barking.
I think it was interesting too. I don't know how much there is behind it or what it means, but that TikTok is pulling off these conspiracy theories, quote unquote, that people are having. When the people are posting videos about this being some satanic ritual, they're getting their shit pulled. What does TikTok care about anybody's cockamamie ideas about anything? I just think that's weird.
That to me just seems like more reverse psychology.
Sure.
Because there's the whole idea with the Streisand effect. You've heard about the Streisand effect, where like if you ban something on the internet, it just makes people more interested in it. So, it seems to me that is pretty clear in that case, that kids on TikTok, if they're told to not supposed to talk about something, they're going to want to talk about it. You know, if TikTok's pulling the videos, they're going to be like, ooh, you know, the forbidden fruit.
Exactly.
That makes sense. And they're starting to bandy about the term satanic panic again, resurrecting it from the 80s, which is odd too. But, you know, that was the big cover up to make all that shit seem illegitimate, people's claims of satanic ritual abuse and stuff like that.
That's a whole other story. But the funny thing is, so when people talk about satanic panic, they pretend that, like, you know, this was all being driven by, like, fundamentalist churches. When the fundamentalist churches were really following in the wake, because it was all created, what they call the satanic panic was all kicked up by the mainstream media. It was all kicked up. It wasn't kicked up in, like, Arkansas or Montana. It was all kicked up in New York and Los Angeles. You know, it was people like Geraldo and Sally Jesse Raphael and Phil Donahue, you know, the talk shows that were pushing this stuff. And, you know, like all the Hollywood movies, you know, I mean, they started doing all the satanic stuff since the 60s, you know. I mean, it's a very complex thing. But, you know, I get very angry about that when people talk about that, because it's just like, oh, yeah, we poor privileged people in, you know, the Northeast were being bullied by people in like some tent, you know, revival tent in Kentucky or somewhere. It's just like, shut the fuck up. What are you talking about? It's like, you're the ones who are pushing this stuff. It all got started. So one of the biggest printing book publishers at the time was St. Martin's Press. And they got this whole ball rolling because they published a book called Michelle Remembers in 1980 that all the main bullet points of the whole satanic panic came from that book. So they started it. You know what I mean? And I'll tell you something, you might have like your weirdo kind of like, I don't know, Tex Mars or Barb Larson, you know, these sort of weirdo fringy types. But people in like, even in mainstream Baptist or fundamentalist churches, they did not want to hear about that stuff. Like, they just were not interested. They weren't interested in the satanic panic at all. It was all just like these fringy kind of late night evangelists that were jumping on the bandwagon that the mainstream media started in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it was reinforced by the mental health profession, because people were going to therapists and, you know, doing these memory recalls, and the
recovered memory, saying, yeah,
exactly, you were raped, you were, you know, this thing happened to you, that thing happened to you. And so that really emboldened a lot of the media because they got behind that.
Oh yeah, they did. Yeah. You gotta put something on those talk shows every day. You know, you've got 60 minutes, maybe sometimes 2 hours to fill. You got to put something on there. So that was made to order, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's interesting that a group like the Satanic Temple, who claim to not really worship a truly amorphous entity as Satan.
They're liars.
Yeah, exactly. That they're calling it a false narrative, and they're going so far as to defame these therapists who are working with the victims of satanic ritual abuse. That seems like an overcompensation to me. Seems suspect.
It's the CIA. It's the CIA. It's the same people who are running like the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, you know, all these CIA, MK Ultra pedophiles. And that's not like a conspiracy theory. That's pretty well documented.
Yeah,
who these people were and what they were all about. You know, I mean, your assholes at the New York Times will just say, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory." It's not a conspiracy theory. You know,
no,
it's like the three founders of the FMSF. You know, all had like pedo raps in their jackets. So,
yeah. And
then you had people like Martin Orne and Jolly West. I mean, all these nefarious people involved in that whole thing, and that guy in that satanic temple, you know, he's pretty much come out and said outright that he was that he is or he was CIA. But he was, this is the other thing too, is that the Satanic Temple and Satanism itself, to me, was always in bed with the extreme right. And then this guy comes along and he's like, well, why don't we brand, like, we're woke Satanists? Like,
Yeah,
exactly.
Where did this come from, Woke Satanists, really? It's like, oh, we're going to, we're fighting abortion laws because abortion is a satanic sacrament now. And it's just like, oh, God. But he was in, before he did this whole boondoggle, whoever's running it or whoever's funding it, he was involved with this guy who was publishing a reprint of this old extreme right sort of Bible called Might is Right by a guy who wrote under the name Ragnar Redbeard.
Oh,
and
yeah.
he was involved in that. So it's just like, so you go from like Ragnar Redbeard to woke, come on. And then he was doing the satanic ritual business. I mean, it's all just, listen, it's, Anton LaVey was a snitch and an informant, right? And he had like a San Francisco PD special badge, and he showed it to Jacques Vallée one time. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So, all these groups, they're all intelligence fronts. And if they're pushing a narrative, it's because they were ordered to. It's as simple as that. It's just plain and simple as that. There's just no two ways about it. All these groups are fronts, and they're just working off the same script.
It's so interesting that you mentioned Jolly West, because I'm working on a book about my time with Carlos Castaneda. And Castaneda kind of came up at the same time that Charles Manson came up. And they had very similar kind of parallel lines along their own personal trajectories. And both had dealings with Jolly West.
Go figure.
What a surprise.
Yeah. So my theory.
Shocking.
Yeah, exactly. My theory is that Castaneda was a CIA op, and that his whole movement, that whole narrative that he was presenting of the Indian in Mexico and these rituals that he was taking part in, that all of that was another experiment to see how many people would fall along with that scheme. Like, who's going to go along with this? And he still sells millions of books every year, and he's been dead for 20 years.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other situation. But the way it works is that they don't like groom people from birth. They wait for people to show up who seem, all these like gifted programs. That's a huge recruitment. Mm-hmm. That's just like they just shovel all the people that they want on various projects and so on. So my guess would be that Castaneda came along and he probably, he wrote the book, the first book, and then Jolly West or whomever, any of those miscreants, got in touch and, told them the way things really work, and this is the plan that you follow, and this is the way it goes,
Well, MK Ultra utilized sociology departments, psychology departments, anthropology departments, so they were embedded in universities all over the United States, and he was at UCLA. So one of the things that was so interesting about his writing was that initially he was asked, in order to receive a PhD, you have to present field notes as an anthropologist. And he did not have one field note. Not one. So how is it that you're going and doing all of these ayahuasca rituals and peyote rituals and psilocybin rituals, and you don't have one note of any of your experiences? And yet you've come up with this book that allegedly is what your experiences were with this seer in Mexico. So there's a lot of really kind of shadiness going on from the beginning of his career at UCLA, and the administration supported that.
Well, I mean, there you go. UCLA. I mean, California.
Exactly.
I mean, Los Angeles. It's Babylon.
So you mentioned earlier, and you also have in your blog about this the Sorcerarchy. What is that? What is that, and what is its job?
Well, it's funny because this is something I've been talking about for a while. That it got to the point when I was looking at all these big public rituals, which I've been looking at for a while, but it really started to kick up in 2016 with the Gothic Tunnel craziness. I don't know if people have seen that, but so. There's always been like a way of thinking that this is like some sort of, they're setting the stage. This is all some precursor event, and there's going to be, the aliens are going to land or something. And then there's this whole train of thought. This is like, oh, this is mind control, and this is all just like hypnotic triggers. And I've always really hated both of those explanations, like pretty passionately. And, but I was always like, I couldn't figure out like a credible counter argument until I started to learn about ritual magic a little bit more, and I realized, oh, this is magical. This is sorcery. These are invocational rituals. That's pretty much what it is. And when you look at it in that light, it starts to make total sense. So the Sorcerarchy to me is like, so say something like the Gothic Tunnel. I mean, that's like the EU. I mean, that's Switzerland is ground zero for a lot of craziness. The people who are pretty high up the power pyramid, And so I sort of landed on this idea of the Sorcerarchy, ruled by sorcery. And then I couldn't believe it. I had found... Manly P. Hall actually did a chapter in Secret Teachings of All Ages where he just basically spelled it all out, like exactly. Like everything that I'd been thinking and sort of talking about and leading to, he had spelled out 100 years ago, and he said, this has been going on forever.
Yeah.
And I was really blown away. I really was. I was like, oh, man. And... one of the things he had mentioned is that he sort of put it in the context of what he called, what did he call it? This term, prosperity psychology. So this would be like, I guess, like at the time, like Napoleon Hill was pretty big. And, and Gordon White had said to me that Napoleon Hill is basically just like, that's just American sorcery, that's just flat out magic. And even though Manly P. Hall didn't kind of call Hill out in that regard, it's pretty clear what he was alluding to. So, that was sort of like when the New Thought was merging, that was like the beginning of the evolution of New Thought, sort of meeting up with Theosophy and creating the New Age movement, like 100 years ago. So that's how I see that. That's how I see the Sorcerarchy. And, it was also when I started seeing all this like Mithraic symbolism everywhere. And it's the kind of Mithraic symbolism that people wouldn't necessarily be familiar with because, first of all, people aren't familiar with Mithraic symbolism at all. And secondly, if you do a search on Mithraism, you're just going to see the famous Tarakton, Mithras slaying the bull. But there's a lot of other symbolism beyond that. And like, for instance, just like a week or so ago, I discovered that like the Phrygian cap, which is associated with Mithras, is on the official seal of the United States Senate. It's It's like,
wow.
wait, what?
Wild.
And, so the Phrygian cap was, it started to be used like in the late 1700s by like the American and French revolutions. And it was associated with freedom, which is just, it's just a typical cover story, because really they wanted to start seeding this Mithraic symbolism into the public consciousness, because the cap that was associated with freedom was the pileus, and it's a totally different cap than the Phrygian cap. But, they wanted to start seeding this more specific symbolism into the culture. So, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But when I started to see like the people who are really sort of flashing their Mithraic colors, so to speak, they all tend to be people like up the pyramid,
Okay, just to add a whole other layer to this, we originally obviously started off talking about Astroworld, and looking at your blog and a couple of posts that you had on Twitter, incorporated something that you have delved into before, the element of Liz Fraser. Liz Fraser, for those of you who don't know, was the singer for a fantastic band called Cocteau Twins back in the 80s and 90s. And that's actually how I first got turned on to you, Chris, is hearing you on Higher Side Chats talking about that. And I was very excited by that, because the Cocteau Twins are one of those bands that you really don't hear bandied about too often, especially on a conspiracy podcast. So the combination of those two things I found was very enthralling and highly compelling, and so many crazy layers to it. But before maybe we get into some of that, how in the hell does Liz Fraser tie into this thing? How are you tying it into Astroworld, or connecting it with Travis or Drake or any of that?
So what had happened is that shortly after Astroworld, a rapper by the name of Young Dolph and died in Memphis, and he died on Jeff Buckley's birthday.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was the first little shot across the bow. And it reminded me that another rapper called Little Peep died shortly after Las Vegas in 2017. So that really kind of like got the whole ball rolling. And as it turns out, there's like one step of separation between Travis Scott, maybe two, between Travis Scott and Elizabeth Fraser. So Elizabeth Fraser is like, like you said, I mean, she started in the early 80s and kind of basically semi-retired in the late 90s. So why would she, have anything to do with Travis Scott? Well, there's a very interesting connection, because so Travis Scott is in with this whole crowd with people like Drake and The Weeknd and so on, right? And The Weeknd is like a huge Cocteau Twins fan. He's like really huge. And one thing I started to notice, like back in 2017 or 2016 or so, I started noticing like I hit a Beyonce single and I'd be like, that kind of sounds like the Cocteau Twins in that middle bridge there. Or I'd hear somebody like SZA, or, all these people that you would not expect to be terribly enthusiastic about the Cocteau. Another one is Katy Perry. I mean, Katy Perry just basically did like a straight out rewrite of a Cocteau Twins song. So I was like, where is this coming from? And then it's like, oh, The Weeknd, because The Weeknd works with, he works with everybody. He's sort of like, I think he's sort of like spreading the Cocteau Twins gospel to all these people. So The Weeknd, so The Weeknd worked with Travis Scott and Drake. Travis Scott and The Weeknd have done, they did a single together, at least one single together, and they've done a couple of videos together. And The Weeknd's, so The Weeknd did the Super Bowl last February, right? And the person who produced the music for that was a guy named, well, he calls himself, what is it, like 10 Tricks Point Never. He's this musician who has worked with like a lot of hip hop guys, but he's also does a lot of experimental music. And on the day of the Met Gala this past year, he released a song and a video with Elizabeth Fraser on the vocals. It's very, very, very extremely weird song. So this is the guy who was, produced the music for the Super Bowl. But here's another connection. The guy who usually produces the Super Bowl halftimes and produced this past year is a guy named Hamish Hamilton. And Hamish Hamilton got his start working for a guy named Mark Fisher, and he got his start on something called the Millennium Dome Show back in 1999 and 2000. So there are actually a lot of like connections between Elizabeth Fraser and like Travis Scott. Or like if you could think of like two people that would have absolutely no connections on Earth, it turns out like not only do they have connections, but they're pretty close connections, right?
Crazy.
So yeah, it is rather crazy. So I mean, I keep saying that I'm surprised, like I'm always surprised when this stuff happens, like I shouldn't be, because this just happens over and over again. And, she just seems to show up in all these different contexts where she doesn't belong. And I mean, a lot of it has to do with that, she has like a very, influential fans, people like The Weeknd. And, I've heard it said that the Cocteau Twins were Prince's favorite band. And, Robert Plant is a huge Cocteau Twins fan. And actually his most recent song that he did with Alison Krauss basically takes the chord progression from Carolyn's Fingers. I don't know if you remember that song.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Cocteau Twins. So they're basically just like doing their own song over the chord changes for Carolyn's Fingers. And I'm like, that's interesting. So, so she shows up in all these contexts where she doesn't belong. But, I mean, I really shouldn't be surprised by this because, so she had done, like probably her best known song is Teardrop that she did with Massive Attack back in 98. Now, I had seen Massive Attack on their tour in 2019, and I was just blown away because, I've been talking about like her being the Sibyl of our age, since at least 2017, and I go and see, and that's exactly how she's being presented. She's being presented as a Sibyl, like straight up and down the line. So they would have her sing these songs, and she tends to sing more in her higher register now, so it sounds very ethereal and sort of fairy-like and so on. And then they're showing like all this horrible shit going on, these giant video screens, like people getting blown up and shot and like all this nightmares, horrible stuff. And it's just like, I was like, oh my God, she's a Sibyl. That's how if you watch those videos, and you can see a lot of them online, it's just like, it's so clear that like, so Adam Curtis produced those, and he's best known for, I guess, Hypernormalization, which is a documentary he did some years ago. But so he's clearly, he gets it, I mean, he clearly gets that she's not just a singer, that she's tapped into some much higher energy. So like, I always say they always try to do what generals and kings did back in the old days. They always try to like, they always want the Sybyl's blessing. I always say like, they always want to rub her off on some of their own workings and so on. So when this whole thing happened where like you have this parallels between Astroworld and Harvest 91, and then like this young Dolph, and then, the connections with Little Peep. And Little Peep is interesting too, because the name comes from Little Bo Peep, and that's the shepherd, and shepherd boy is the meaning of Buckley, right? So Jeff Buckley is the shepherd boy. And that ties into like Boötes and Virgo, and it's just...
And she is a Virgo.
And she is a Virgo, that's correct, yeah. So, yeah, it's crazy. And the interesting thing too is like when she'll pop up. So she popped up during the London Olympics in 2012. there was a Meltdown Festival, and she did her only solo concert. She did a warm-up show before that, but she did her only solo concerts to date during the London Olympics. And it's interesting, too, because on one of the other nights of this festival, Marina Abramovich was there. So it's just like, like really pretty highly charged. So, but then she shows up in 2013 and plays right around the corner from like one of Trump's big buildings. And this is when Trump first started like dropping hints that he was going to run for president and so on. But then, she shows up in 2017 on July 23rd and does this talk at Royal Albert Hall with John Grant and stuff. And this is like, this was 100 days before the Freemasons had their tercentenary there. This was 66 days after Chris Cornell died. The tickets for that went on sale the day after he died, and the same day, Twin Peaks was premiered in Los Angeles.
Don't you mean Chris Cornell was murdered?
Well, I listen. I don't know. I'm not convinced of that. Just because I'm a Soundgarden fan, and
You don't think he was red scarfed?
I don't know. Well, she predicted that, by the way, in one of the songs. That's something that I've done a lot of work on, is how eerily, specifically, that was predicted on the last song in Heaven, Las Vegas. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Listen, I'm always open for a good juicy conspiracy theory, but I'm not buying it yet. I'm just not buying it yet. I haven't really seen, information or evidence that compels me. But then there was the whole thing when Chester Bennington died on Chris Cornell's birthday. He committed suicide on Chris Cornell's birthday. But Chester Bennington had asked Elizabeth Fraser to sing on a Linkin Park album. And
wow.
Chris Cornell, he appeared on stage with Elizabeth Fraser, not simultaneously, but they were both on the 1996 Lollapalooza tour.
Yeah.
And then they also had the connection with Jeff Buckley because Chris Cornell was close with him. And, of course, Elizabeth Fraser had the torrid romance with Buckley and so on. So, I mean, there's just all these kind of connections. But, again, so this Astroworld and Young Dolph thing and him dying on Jeff Buckley's birthday, it just gets the whole thing open. And you just start to see, it's just the weirdest thing because it's almost like, can you, picture, a movie where, like an alien virus sort of, invades somebody and they, takes over their head, but then all the energies or the organism follows their blood vessels all over their body, and
right.
This sort of this aftermath. That's the way it always is with this stuff. It's always just oh my God, why is this connection there? And then there's 100 smaller connections that get filled in. It's
right.
just so weird.
What are your thoughts about Bennington's death? There's, he came out publicly that he had been raped when he was a young man. Do you believe the narrative that he committed suicide? There's also conspiracy theories out there that he was also murdered because they were about to expose the Clinton Foundation and all of these things that were going on in Haiti. What are your thoughts about that?
I have read all that stuff. I've seen all that stuff. I find it very interesting. And, to be honest with you, the music industry is phenomenally evil. It's just evil from top to bottom. And there's all sorts of, horrific people sticking their nose in and out of that business. I just haven't seen, a real strong smoking gun, for my purposes yet. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention is that after young Dolph died, we had the Fraser Valley in Canada, where the road, the river, and the rail were destroyed
Yes.
by the flooding.
Oh my God. That's crazy.
Yeah, and then
That's
we had
crazy.
Pete Buttigieg's posing the day that young Dolph was killed, posing in front of the Memphis Pyramid in a tweet.
Wow.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. Or no, it was the day before. It was a day or two before. So that was the 15th. That was the 17th. But also the last video that this guy, young Dolph, made has him like underwater, like he's underwater, like.
Whoa.
Yeah, and you know the whole thing where Elizabeth Fraser had recorded "Teardrop" as Jeff Buckley was drowning, and like she found out like after while they were recording that song.
Holy
like
shit.
her manager had called her and said that they can't find Jeff. So yeah.
Can you delve a little bit into that story, their relationship?
All right, so what had happened? Let's start at the beginning. So the last episode of the Monkees in 1968 had the Monkees series ended with Tim Buckley premiering "Song to the Siren."
Yes.
And so Jeff Buckley, he had, Mary Guibert had Jeff in 66, and basically Tim just wasn't around. He just sort of didn't really have any contact at all with Jeff Buckley. But so this all starts off, and like the episode itself is something you should really watch. It's called The Frodis Caper, and it's like about like mind control, MK Ultra, and like aliens and marijuana, and it's just crazy. It couldn't be more loaded if it tried. So
The Monkees episode.
yeah, it's called The Frodis Caper, and it's interesting because you can't spell The Frodis Caper without the letters of Fraser. I always thought that was interesting. So anyway, so Tim Buckley dies, I believe, in 1975 of heroin overdose. And then Jeff Buckley, throughout the 80s, is a musician. He starts playing, and, he's very gifted. And somebody plays him, her version of "Song to the Siren," and he just became like totally obsessed with her. And what had happened was that somehow they had met in 1991, I believe at the, maybe it was the Palladium, when the Cocteau Twins played in Los Angeles, and they had met. And then they began like sort of talking on the phone and writing each other letters sometime in like mid 1993, when she had already split up from her husband, who was also her partner in the group. And this is the interesting thing, because everybody talks about that album Grace, like, that's like this classic album that he had made. Well, she was really the muse for that album, because they had already started this relationship, even though it was mostly on the phone and so on. But before he went to like really record on the album, he went to meet her for the first time. He went over to London. But I had read, it's been said that when he and the band were getting ready to record that album, they just binged on Cocteau Twins records. Like that was like how they got ready. Like that's how they warmed up. And it's funny too, because I remember when I first heard "Last Goodbye," I'm just like, yeah, this guy listens to a lot of Cocteau Twins records, and lo and behold, So anyway, so they had this relationship, and I'm going to add another new wrinkle that I haven't really talked about. I certainly didn't talk about on Greg's show, but so they had this relationship, and they were both sort of busy, and she was sort of in the middle of like this major kind of psychic meltdown, and from what I understand, it like this relationship lasted from about mid 1993, and it became a physical relationship in early 1994, and then it lasted till, I guess, like mid 1995. And what had happened is that he was asked during an interview, if they were an item, and he denied it. And apparently she was just like absolutely devastated by that, that he had denied that, that they were having a relationship. And then she broke up with him. And this is an interesting story too. I heard that he would call the studio, like the Cocteau Twins studio in Twickenham, like every day, like trying to, after they had broken up. So he took up with this, I guess she's a woman, Joan Wasser. I don't want to mispronoun her. I don't know what pronoun she uses, but and then they had gone to Australia, and he had almost drowned. He and Joan Wasser were swimming off the Gold Coast in Australia, which is like really treacherous waters for like experienced surfers. And, he was just like this kind of guy who was just like, oh, hey, man, just like, I just want the experience, And so he and Joan Wasser had almost drowned. And he started writing sort of songs alluding to drowning. One of them was called Nightmares by the Sea, which I very much believe was written about her. And then he wrote a song called Witch's Rave, which might be about her, but it might be about another person who we'll get to in a second. So before he had that experience in Australia, another person enters the frame, which is PJ Harvey. And PJ Harvey, after he had died, she had written a song called Memphis. And it's basically, if you read the lyrics, it's basically like necromancy. And it's like, speak through me, I'll speak for you, But it was also like, what a way to go. You had a great death, good for you. You must be smiling somewhere. And it's just like really freaking creepy. But before she had died, or he had died, like well before he had died, she put out the album To Bring You My Love. But there's a song on it called Long Snake Moan, which is like a really heavy death curse, like, pull you under the water, you're going to drown. It's my voodoo. It's like really heavy, explicit death curse. You guys familiar with the song?
Oh,
yes,
yeah, definitely.
Very familiar.
So, okay. So there are also a couple songs in there that I can't really go into this, but I believe were targeted at Elizabeth. I think there are a couple songs in there that are, making use of information that she had gotten, personal information she had gotten about her, because she had it seems to me she had some sort of hang up about her. And the connections are pretty tight too, because after the Cocteau Twins had left 4AD, PJ Harvey was sort of Evo Watts Russell, who ran that label. She was sort of his big discovery, and right. he had actually put up the money for her to record her first album and so on. So but she also worked with Mick Harvey, who was in the birthday party, and the birthday party is sort of how the Cocteau Twins got their start, because Robin Guthrie and Elizabeth Fraser were big birthday party fans, and they were sort of groupies and would follow them around and stuff, which is really interesting too, because you think of like, people have this image of the Cocteau Twins as being like this sort of like they're airy fairy sort of fluffy bunnies. And they're like huge, like they're groupies of like the birthday party, which is like the most violent, aggressive band on the scene at the time. You know what I mean? Like
the Stooges of the 80s.
Yeah, like everyone at the concerts would just end in riots. So there are a lot of things about her that are really misconceptions. But so then, so Jeff Buckley, of course, drowns while she's recording a song about him in London. And I think that kind of basically ended her career for the most part.
Wow. Because
she quit the Cocteau Twins a few months later, and she's done very little since. And I think that she just was, kind of just completely I think she was devastated by their split, and then I think she was like doubly devastated by her death. And then like it's funny because PJ Harvey is the only female singer I've ever seen Elizabeth Fraser like say like not completely kind things about. Like of all the interviews that I've read of her, the only singer that she said less than glowing things about is PJ Harvey, which is really kind of fascinating to me. And then like PJ Harvey puts out that song where she's not only doing this whole really creep. I mean, I think she's a satanic witch. I'm just going to I mean, that's just my opinion. And I think there's a lot of, she sings the songs like the devil, when it's quiet, I invite the devil into my heart and all this kind of stuff. So I don't think that's a big leap. But so not only did she write this really creepy song about Jeff Buckley, but she also stole lines that he had written for Elizabeth Fraser in a song called Morning Theft. And PJ Harvey claimed that he had written these lines for her. Wow. And it's just like really creepy and weird and kind of like almost like high school Mean Girls stuff almost.
Right.
And it just really gives you the creeps. But, just the fact that not only would she like write this really creepy song about, how great it is you're dead, let me sing for you,
Yeah.
But also she, included these really, these very personal lines that Jeff Buckley had written for Elizabeth Fraser and said that he had written them for her. And it's just really weird and crazy. I think she's super talented, but I also think she's insane, and I think she's demonic. So, but that was like the wrinkle. I mean, I just discovered this past year, all this stuff. And if you were like, I don't talk about this stuff in public, but I have a lot of reasons to believe that she wrote songs and actually made videos that are kind of attacking Elizabeth Fraser for some weird reason that I don't know. So other than the fact that she's sick and weird. But don't forget that PJ Harvey also, after doing that album, started up a relationship with Nick Cave. Mm-hmm. And they did a record together, right? And
the song off of Murder Ballads?
Yes. But I think they did some other stuff together. And so there's another connection. It's like, it's really interesting too, because it's like, these are really very small sort of clustered communities, involved in these kind of things. So like when PJ Harvey is connected to, or connects herself, I'm not even convinced that she actually even had any kind of relationship with Jeff Buckley. But I don't know. But she wants people to think that. But, those people are all sort of like in the same cohort, right? But when like Elizabeth Fraser connects to like Travis Scott, you're just like, what is going on in this world, Like 2 degrees of separation. So, and then, and then of course the whole timing thing, with that song coming out with the Met Gala. And it just never ends. It never ends. And if people want to kind of get a sense of it, like if some of your listeners aren't really familiar with this, I did a post called Laugh While You Still Can. And it just basically starts off at the beginning of the Cocteau Twins' career. And it just shows that every major sort of career move in her life is concurrent with some like devastating earthquake or plane crash or tornado or hurricane or whatever. It's really crazy. But this is where the whole Sybil thing comes in. So, but there's also like, the things that I've been studying is that, I'm convinced that she prophesied Chris Cornell's death, probably unconsciously. I don't know how much of this is conscious on her part, but I also think she prophesied, of course, Jeff Buckley's death, but also the Notre Dame being destroyed by fire, because actually one of the songs that she's on Heaven in Las Vegas is about Notre Dame, and the first chorus starts with "From Out of the Fire" and then ends with "From Out of the Fire," and it's really strange. So, but there are all these sort of events that I think are predicted, but then there's this whole thing with these weird coincidences, you know. For instance, like their first television appearance in America was on the day, or in North America, you know, in the Western Hemisphere, was on the day of the Mexico City earthquake in 1985, which was, you know, this really devastating thing. So, and if anybody's ever seen the movie Knowing with Nick Cage, it's like, if you read that post, you're going to like really start to think, oh my God, this is Knowing. So anyway,
So were you a fan of Cocteau Twins when this whole kind of puzzle started to come together? How did this all start for you?
Well, okay, so it started in 1983 when I first heard from the Flagstones. And I think before like the second chorus started, I was on the phone with the radio station, WBCN in Boston at the time. You know, like, you have to tell me right now what this is, because
oh my God,
this is like, I don't know where this is coming from. This is coming from another galaxy or something. Yeah. I mean, like, oh my God, you know. Definitely. I mean, a lot of people have the same reaction.
For sure.
So, but I'll tell you something. So, I got into them, you know, and I really liked the Pearly Dewdrops thing. But then I sort of went to this big like punk and metal phase for a while, and then in 1986, I was working with a singer, and he gave me a cassette mix of stuff that I'd never heard. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, it just totally changed my life. But I really, you know, I'll tell you something. Back then, I really started to think, like, have these weird thoughts, like, she's like an oracle, like she's the herald, like she's the angel's herald. She's like, this is the trumpet call, you know, this is Gabriel, like, this is the call, you know. And oddly enough, back in 2018, she was part of this thing called Clarion Call, which was done by this group called Supple Fox, who did this ritual that they say these things, or openly say these things, ritual. They did this thing in Hobart, Tasmania. You know, this like this big open air things where like just basically they hire a bunch of women to sound like Elizabeth Fraser, and they play it on these giant loudspeakers all over the city, and then they have a helicopter driving around, and of course the helicopter pilot died shortly after, because, you know, the siren is another thing that you just don't want to play with. And it's interesting too, because the siren is everywhere you look now because of Starbucks, right? So, all right. So I was convinced that, you know, and then I kind of like, I don't know, I put it out of my mind, you know. It's like, I didn't have a lot of information to sort of feed that suspicion, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like, sure. But you know, you'd see people for years and years say like, she's otherworldly, she's not of this planet, you know, like she's a ghost, she's an alien, she's this, she's that. And it wasn't until, you know, when Chris Cornell died, because I started listening to a lot of her music again around that time, and that it really kicked in. But when I first started doing the blog back in 2008, like one of the first things I did was this whole siren thing with her and Jeff Buckley. Mm-hmm. And then I revisited that because they were going to make a movie with Reeve Carney from Penny Dreadful, who looks exactly like Jeff Buckley, and he's a really good musician too. They were going to do a biopic with him in 2000, I guess it was 2014, and then I started looking into this thing, and I was like, oh my God, these songs actually do have lyrics. Wait a minute. And I was looking at like all these old lyrics, and I'm like, this is all like really heavy, like sex magic stuff, you know, like occult sex magic and everything. And I was just like, well, wait a minute, that kind of changes everything. Like, wait a minute, like let me kind of like figure this out. So I did this big 3-part thing on it, and you know, so I started looking at like, you know, where she's from and all this kind of weirdness attached to, you know, her past and the area that she's from and so on. And then like that was really popular, and like I have people like asking me like, you know, are you going to revisit that? And I was just like, what else could I possibly write about that? Like, I was just like, in 2014, I was just like, ironically enough, right? And then in 2017, when the connection between Chris Cornell and Jeff Buckley turned up. I mean, it's just the floodgates just opened, and they have not closed. Like they have not closed. And like I said, like here we are talking about like her connections to Travis Scott and Astroworld and all this other kind of stuff. And you know, I mean, this is just, we're just in a different world now. You know,
For sure.
Things are happening that just are not on the levels that we were taught they were. I mean, I've had a lot of people tell me. For instance, I was friends with Tracy Twyman, who died a couple years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And actually, I was supposed to do her show just the day she disappeared. She sort of dropped out of sight. And actually, we had like this really great 2-hour conversation that we both, like, at the end of it, we're both like, oh, why didn't we tape that? It makes such a great podcast. We had it on Skype and so on. But she had this theory that, that we all died, like 2012 actually happened. You know, Nibiru crashed into the earth, and now we're all dead and we're all in hell. And I don't know if I'd go that far, but you know, the reality has definitely changed significantly. You know, what we in my group, my discussion group, we use the shimmer as our metaphor. Did you guys see Annihilation? The movie Annihilation? No. So the whole thing about, this is really interesting because this ties in what I was talking about again. So the whole thing, the Annihilation is like this meteor crashes to Earth, and it contains like this alien organism or alien energy. It's just something alien that just starts rewriting like the DNA, but it also starts writing time, and it also, like, reality and time just start changing. And like anything that comes into contact with this force field or this energy, you know, starts morphing, and it starts like recombining things and so on and so forth. So
wow.
we use that metaphor. But here's the interesting thing, is that movie takes place in Florida, but it was shot in England. And actually the exteriors for it were shot in the same exact location. Like, there are actually shots that line up with the video for Pearly Dewdrops Drops.
Wow.
Made in 1994. Like,
trip.
You know, but it gets even stranger. So Pearly Dewdrops Drops, I actually have this like program. There's a program online where you can isolate the vocals and stuff. Ooh. And I'll sit there and I'll decode all these vocals, because a lot of these songs that people don't think have lyrics actually do. But the thing that really struck me about the Pearly Dewdrops Drops video or the lyrics is that they seem to line up with the supernova in 1987 that happened in the constellation of Dorado, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, if you listen to that song at the end, she's saying, you know, Ruby Star, Dorade. Mm-hmm. And Dorade is, it's just another version of Dorado. I think Dorade is the Spanish or the French, and Dorado is the Latin. So, you know, but it's like the Ruby Star, and if you look at the supernova, it's a Ruby Star, but it's also, the astronomers called it the String of Pearls because it was a ruby star surrounded by these white, I don't know what they were, but it looked like a jewelry setting. It looked like a ruby surrounded by pearls, a pearl setting. Mm-hmm. So, but the interesting thing about that is, there are two things that are interesting about that. Is a lot of sort of New Age people were saying that, you know, the radiation from that supernova started to change our consciousness, you know, because there are theories that supernova can create radiation that like alters our DNA and so on. But
wow.
So here's the thing. So Pearly Dewdrops Drops was first performed in public exactly 3 years to the day that supernova 1987 was first sighted. Okay. It's February 24th. And, you know, you have the connection to this meteor in Annihilation, which just for some bizarre reason was filmed in the same location as the Pearly Dewdrops video. Because, like, why would you not shoot in winter in the middle of England when you want to, recreate the southern coast of Florida. Like, who wouldn't think to do that?
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just so much of it. And like I said, where we can put the link in the show notes for that huge, and it's interesting too, because a lot of times I'll just think like everybody just thinks I'm crazy and nobody cares about this stuff, but it's actually, that post is I think it's the second most popular post of all time.
Wow.
In the history of the blog. I think it's gotten like almost 20,000 hits so far. So
crazy.
Yeah. So like people aren't necessarily wanting to talk about it, but that post has gotten a lot of traffic.
I would love to see your notes on the song lyrics. I would love to see what you've come up with, because I've always had my theories over the years, and taken hallucinogens and listened to Cocteau Twins and come up with alternate theories. But I've also heard that she's I've heard the Oracle connection, but I've also heard a channeler. That she's basically channeling some consciousness, and
I believe that
the muse of some consciousness, that she's like.
But that's what Sybils are. I mean, Sybils were channels. So Sybils and oracles were channels for Apollo. Okay.
Okay.
They would go into trances and Apollo would speak through them. But here's the interesting thing that people don't realize. So people see with like these Hollywood movies, and it's like, this like girl dancing around going, "King, you'll be dead. You'll die on the 45th day of the month and the place and the king." Like that's not how it works at all. It's like basically like these women, start off as being girls, but then it became women because like people would come in and do like nasty things to the girls and stuff. But they would basically go into these trances and sing in glossolalia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they'd sing in tongues or an invented language or a language that people didn't really understand. Who does that sound like?
Exactly.
It's Fraser.
Yeah. So, and then what you would have is the priest would come in and they'd be like, "Okay, well, let's figure out what she's saying here." And like you had like this whole priest class that were dedicated to trying to figure out like what she was saying. But this is the interesting thing too, is that like, as I got older and they were sort of replaced by younger models, the Sybils would go on tour and sing their prophecies in like various cities, so like the Commune Sibyl would like go to like Rome and to Athens and, Alexandria, wherever, Tripoli, Syria. I mean, they would just go around the world singing their glossolalia prophecies. It's so absurd. Oh my God. But people don't realize that. Like, I've actually sat down and studied this stuff. Like I went back and read like all the primary source information, from all these ancient historians. And you just like, oh, this is exactly what we have now. It's exactly what we have now.
Would you perceive her as being a malevolent force or a benevolent force, or neither?
Oh yeah, I think she's a malevolent force. I mean, benevolent force. Absolutely. I think that there's a very powerful healing power in her singing, and
that's a huge relief.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing is that we're always frightened by seers and Sibyls. They're frightening because they see things that we don't. But I think that her singing and her music is extraordinarily healing. And it's like, just go watch interviews with her. It's like she's like the ultimate manic pixie dream girl. She's like so goofy and like, you can't believe that, like, how did this music come from this, like, she would play like the goofy friend in like, I don't know, like a rom-com or something. You know what I mean? Like
Now
the little goofy friend with the pixie cut,
Now she looks like the goofy grandma.
Yeah, exactly. She looks like the grandma who gets high, like the grandma who gets high with you know what I mean? And like grows her own like herbs and stuff on the porch.
Yes.
So more about the Sibyl. Is a Sibyl like a normal person that sort of develops a power to do this? Are they born like that? Is it
chosen?
Are they possessed by an archetype? Yeah, chosen. What is the typical way a Sibyl operates?
Well, it depends. There were a number of different ways that they were chosen. But basically, somebody would notice that they had this gift, that they had this power. You know what I mean? And, but like I said, I mean, people took this for granted. People are just like, yeah, there are these women who like can do this, and they sing these weird songs in this weird, indecipherable tongue, and you have to figure out what they actually mean. But the greatest minds of the ancient world, this was part of their reality, and generals and kings would consult with them. Like Alexander the Great traveled. Well, I think he was like somewhere in Asia, and he traveled all the way to like Libya to this oasis because there was a particular Sibyl there that he wanted to consult with. So I mean, this is you're talking like that was like a 3-month trip, right? Back in the day. And, he traveled this huge distance just to consult with the Sibyl, right? So it's just like, these people were not frivolous. These people were not superstitious, and they would not be into this stuff. Particularly the Romans. I mean, the Romans were like very pragmatic people, and they did not have time for nonsense. It's like if you came in and you were like a soothsayer and stuff, and it turns out you were bullshit, you'd get nailed to a cross, and that would be the end of it. You know what I mean? They didn't think anything. I mean, like when the priests of Isis showed up in Rome and just started like fortune telling and stuff, they're all of them. Goodbye. You know what I mean? The Romans did not tolerate this any kind of nonsense when it came to this stuff. They did not look fondly. I mean, they were very superstitious in a way, because of Fortuna. That was their big thing. It was like, if you trip on the stairs when you're on your way to a battle, you better call the battle off because Fortuna's telling you, like, she's not really smiling on you today, right?
Right.
Sure.
So, but it's like we've become, it's because of the Enlightenment too. It's like, in the post-Enlightenment, we've become so almost like addicted to like this rational reductionist view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we think we're so smart because of it, even though we just seem to be getting stupider and stupider. Mm-hmm. Back in the ancient world, I mean, you're talking about people who like invented fucking calculus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like
For sure.
people who could do like really advanced mathematics without a computer, right? I mean, these people, look at the stuff the Romans built. These people were not screwing around. And they took this all very, very, very seriously. And unfortunately, we don't, or at least, I don't know, maybe the public don't. I do believe that there are definitely people who do, particularly people high up in like Britain establishment, because they had her sing the role of, the mitochondrial Eve of the new Nephilistic race in the Millennium Dome show, so they you don't just give that to anybody, you know what I mean? And clearly Adam Curtis, when he's presenting her, you got to watch those videos because it's just like, there's just absolutely no, the only way they could have actually made it more obvious is that they actually did just like put her in a toga and give her like a wreath of laurels and have her sit on a high chair with like like an urn burning incense below her.
Right.
That's the only way literally the only way they could have made it more obvious. And but it's kind of it's kind of disturbing too, because it's just like, I know a lot of people like into Adam Curtis and stuff, but it just seems to me that he was kind of read in on everything that was on the way. Because if you see some of these video montages he did, it seemed to be like, all right, this is what's coming in 2020, kids.
Right.
Get ready for it.
Sure.
And,
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was done.
And can one be an unwitting Sibyl? Like, could somebody like Liz Fraser be a Sibyl, not know it or not recognize it because she's not in a society that even has something like that on its menu?
Well, yeah, I think you can be. I think she's got to have some sort of sense of it by now, with all the stuff that's kind of like transpired. And plus she's, like she's really into, well, like the last I heard, she was really into Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy and that kind of stuff. Yeah, she was. She was going to a school in England called Emerson, which I guess is a Steiner college. And she's extremely intelligent too. I mean, extremely intelligent person.
And well read.
Yeah, she's very, very, very well read. The whole thing is that she's kind of like, but she's kind of like that manic hyper, like we were saying, like that kind of, like who would play her? Like, I don't know, like Lori Petty or somebody would play her back in like the early 90s or something. Like that kind of, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that kind of character.
Yeah.
Well, and her vocalizations too. What you were talking about, the glossolalia, like a lot of that. Yeah. I mean, it seems, I think I want to remember, I want to think that I remember reading in an interview that some of that stuff was spontaneously done on the spot. She didn't write any lyrics down. Is that what was going on, to your knowledge too?
Well, I think there's a mix. A lot of it is, she's really into improvisation. Like she would write on the spot and then she'd do like 100 takes to get the vocals right. But she did also write lyrics out. But, what they would, what they've said, the other two people in the group have said is that she would just like stretch words out to such an extent that you don't understand that she is actually singing in English, but she's doing so in a way that, I think it's kind of, after a point, I think it's half and half. Like starting with like the Treasure album, I think it's kind of half and half, where it's half glossolalia and half like really weird, distorted, stretched out English. So there you go. Now my cat's starting in.
Exactly. What is this, Dr. Doolittle?
That's like, they all want my attention. I swear to God. It's like, Daddy, what the hell? It's like a psychodrama all day with my pets. He's a sweet guy though. He's a black cat. He looks like he's maybe part, like, what is that? Like Prussian blue. Is that what it is? Or Prussian? Those really fluffy black cats.
Yeah.
And he's really sweet, but he's loud as you get. Like his voice just carries throughout the house.
He's vocalizing.
Yeah, he's singing along. He's like, "Hey, are you playing Heaven Las Vegas up there?"
Exactly.
I love it.
We listened
that's
to
the other thing, though. I
Yeah.
didn't put this in that thing that you're going to post in the notes. But if you go and watch the Heaven Las Vegas video, it's really eerie because it starts off with like a building, a gold building, and then you see scaffolding, and then you see what looks like holes in like kind of like an artistic representation of bullet holes, and then you see like these sparklers that look like tracer bullets. It's really creepy. It's really weird, and that's made like in 1990. You know what I mean? So it's just like, But this is the thing, it's like this, whatever this is, whatever is driving this, whatever power is driving this is like using, the people around her as part of this as well, But like I said, people took this for granted, the Christians had great respect for the Cumean Sibyl, right? Because they felt that she had predicted the coming of Jesus Christ. So it's just like people understood this stuff. But the thing that really gave me the understanding of the Sibyl, rather than just like, I don't know, she's psychic or something else is going on, the thing that really landed me on the Sibyl was Philip K. Dick. And, because he had written a story called Eye of the Sibyl. And it's interesting, too, because Philip K. Dick has this whole thing with the strawberries and strawberry fields forever and so on. And strawberry is actually the definition of Fraser in the French.
Yeah.
And there's all these, like, very interesting and strange connections. For instance, they played their first big show, which was actually their third ever show, opening up for the birthday party 3 days after Philip K. Dick had died. So
Wow.
like they made their big debut the week that he died, and then they made their first Peel session aired the week that Blade Runner was released.
Yeah.
Right? So there's all these like interesting connections. And then of course Blade Runner 2049 had the whole thing with, it was in Las Vegas, and that was released like a week after the whole thing with Harvest 91. And oh man, it makes your head spin. There's just so much to keep track of. But it changes your reality after a while. Like it's like my experience of reality is totally different than it was 3 or 4 years ago. It's just totally different. Like the way I see the world, the way I experience the world, the way I perceive the world, like the way I perceive certain environments that I'm in, the way that I feel like in a more natural environment, and the way I feel like in like an urban environment where I start to get like, I'm just picking up on too much and there's just so much dark energy, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
my entire experience of the world has totally changed.
And was this journey that you started with the blog in 2008, was it intentional? Did you kind of set out to do this, or did these things kind of come upon you and you felt almost like an instinct or an impetus to do it? Was there some kind of a push?
Well, I started the blog because I released a book called Our Gods Wear Spandex, and I wanted to promote the book. And, that's really how it started. And then, I just started doing all this other kind of stuff and just sort of nursing my obsessions. And this whole thing with, Jeff Buckley and the Siren and so on was really one of the things that I'd been really obsessed with at the time I was writing Our Gods Wear Spandex. So I just figured it was a natural to do that, because I've been watching these videos on YouTube, and if you watch certain videos of her performing, she's so clearly being possessed.
Yes.
And it's so like, it's just like
her eyes.
Okay, so yeah, her eyes, and just like her general
demeanor,
presentation. Yeah, it's just like, it's just clearly that something else has taken hold of her. And again, it's so funny because like when you see her just like in these interviews, and she's just like this goofy little elf, you know what I mean? But that's the thing that really struck me, was when I started watching some of these performance videos, and I'm just like, what the hell? Like that's somebody who is like in thrall. That's what it means to be in thrall. That's Gordon White had a great term for, because I sent him a link to one of the videos that I was just freaking out about, because it's just like, it's just so obvious. And he was like, oh yeah, she's horsing. He calls it horsing, from the whole, like I guess the Voodoo and Santeria thing. But it's just so obvious that something else is taking control. And I can't really think of like too many examples where it's like I've seen that and not like, oh, that's just somebody putting on an act. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like when you see somebody like truly in thrall, like truly in the like I can see it more like like say older Jim Morrison performances, or Joe Strummer, you could see that a lot. I mean, just certain performers that like you could just like they have like this shamanic kind of energy,
Right.
and you could just tell that they were just something had taken them over. But not so much with the like this very slow and druggy kind of wavy, hypnotic, shimmery kind of music. It doesn't seem like that would be the venue so much for that kind of energy to take over.
Did you see the 23 Envelope documentary that was done that features the Cocteau Twins?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's so interesting because talking about her demeanor, she does seem very childlike and, so diminutive and kind of this giggly schoolgirl energy almost.
But that documentary was made at around the time that they recorded Tiny Dynamine and Echoes in a Shallow Bay. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. So watch that video, and people can follow along at home and just watch this little chirpy, little bird-like, little cute little girl almost. I mean, she does look like a little kid. And then listen to those records when she's just like the wrath of God, you know what I mean? It's just like this howling that's just like, where is this coming from? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, that shit still gives me goosebumps, man. I've listened to that stuff a million times for 40 years almost, and it's stuff that still makes my hair stand on end.
Yeah.
And it's like, how did this little cute little Scottish girl, this wee little lassie, summon that just ferocity? It's unbelievable to me. It's just absolutely amazing to me. But listen, I used to be a musician, right? And anybody who's a musician is not going to have any problem with the idea of spirit possession, because it's like, it happens. You feel it. I mean, I've had experiences where I just know that something else had taken control, and I'm just watching my hands do something else. You know what I mean? Musicians, I think, would probably be the most amenable to the idea of spirit possession, because it's something that, like music is just an enormous mystical power. I mean, what is it? Where does it come from? Yeah. And like, how is it created? And you just, like I said, like go listen to a song like Great Spangled Fritillary, and it's just this primeval wailing that sounds, I mean, if you listen to that song, it's like, how is that not exactly how the Sybils actually sounded back in the old days? Like, how is that not exactly what it was? You know what I mean? And, but it's just like, it's spirit possession, And it's like, not all spirit possession is demonic possession, It's like just two different things,
Yeah.
And it seems to me like it's interesting too, because I've just been noticing, like seeing more and more people that seem very clearly demonically possessed. And their demeanor is much different. Where like when somebody seems to be like in the thrall, like these musical powers, right? It's like, it's almost like they can't even control themselves. It's like they're just channeling the sound, and it's like, you know what I mean? They're almost like not even aware of it. But like when you see like somebody who's demonically possessed, it seems to me that it's just like, there's this just like, I know what's going on, and you know what's going on, and this thing riding me what's going on, and it's just like, we all know what this is,
Yeah,
and we all know
exactly.
what this is, you know what I mean? And it's scary though. It's really frightening to me.
Yeah, it's resonating at a lower register, so it's not this kind of high frequency energy that it kind of elevates you and makes you feel lighter and makes you feel angelic as you're listening to it. It's this kind of heaviness that you can feel. I can sense that.
Well, it's interesting you should bring that up, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been thinking about like, you see this more and more, these people on Twitter or whatever, like, let's summon demons and demon summoning and all this kind of stuff, and satanic, I mean, you see this a lot. And to me, it's almost like those lower frequency energies that you're talking about, they seem to be more accessible, right? It seems to be like it's easier to like get in contact with them than like with like a higher energy. And did you guys ever see the movie A Dark Song?
No.
No.
Oh my God! Oh man! Oh.
Write it in your notes, Hunter.
Like I won't go too much into detail because I don't want to spoil it. But
I've been writing notes. I've been writing notes since you've been talking.
I think it's, what is it? Is it the Abramelin? Is that what it's called? The Abramelin working? Is that what it's called? You know,
Doesn't
that whole.
ring a bell.
I'm trying to think if that's it. But it's about like this woman wants this magician to work this angelic summoning, you know, and it's, you know, they lock themselves in this house for like 2 months.
Wow.
So it seems to me like the higher energies are more difficult to access, and the lower energies, to me, like, you know, the whole thing with like, oh, this demon's going to do whatever you want, you know, he'll give you whatever you want, you know, whatever.
Right.
And then you see how that always just turns out the same way. But you know, the higher energies seem to be like, again, there's the cat. They seem like, you know, they're much more difficult to access and so on. But when you do, you know, this is what you get.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's interesting too, because it's like angels and demons to me, like, you know, I mean, those are just words that we use like for these, almost like these energy frequencies, right? I mean, I hate to use that term because it sounds like very new age and stuff. But it's just like, let's just use that metaphor for a moment. But it just seems to me that like people who have done work with angelic contact and people have done work with demon contact, it's like there seems to be like a lot of, like, there's more of a similarity between the two than you might want to think. But I think what separates it in the long run is how does this manifest itself in your life, you know, with the test of time and things. And when my observations and my study is just like when people fuck around with these demonic powers and stuff, no matter how you choose to define them, and this could be entirely psychological, right? But however you choose to define it, let's just say that. Let's just, you know, I want to give people like an out. But whenever people like concentrate on all that symbolism, like the symbolism we've been talking about with the Astroworld, it always just ends up badly, you know? I mean, Travis Scott probably thought he was like hot shit, you know? Hey, man, look at me. Ooh, I'm, you know, the Nephilim, baby. You know, it's like, hey, you know, like I'm, you know, those otherworldly entities, man. Everybody thinks they're evil, but they're going to give me everything I want, man. Hey, cool. And then like, your life is just, I mean, his life is just, his career is basically over, you know? It's just like, he's going to spend the rest of his life in courtrooms, you know? So, to me, like this to me, like, it's just another great example of just how this plays out and how, like, when you mess around with this stuff, when you mess around with these darker, lower forms, it always ends badly because, you know, the whole term deceitful spirits, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, and the other path, the path on the other end of the spectrum it's a lot harder road, you know, and it's a lot less immediately rewarding. But I think, you know, it's in the long run, it's going to do a lot more for you, I think. Yeah.
Well, it takes more discipline. It takes a
yes,
tremendous
it absolutely
amount
does,
of
yes.
discipline.
Which is why you guys need to see A Dark Song. I can't believe you didn't see that movie. Oh,
we are going
man.
to.
I've never even heard of it.
Going to.
Sounds fantastic.
But this lower energy, this lower frequency, it resonates so readily because it's low hanging fruit. So that's what makes it so accessible to people.
Yeah.
Because it takes such a little energy to tap into it. Where, this higher frequency, you've really got to have your physical, spiritual, and, the whole thing together in order to connect with it. So I think that's where it's different, is that if you take a lazy spirit, of course they're going to want to go the easy route, because it's you just roll over and there's the demon, where, we're talking about reaching like this higher plane of perception. You have to do some honing to get there.
Yeah, it takes a lot of discipline and a lot of patience that I don't think most people have. And, it kind of reminds me of Crowley, right? Because Crowley sort of started off with like the Golden Dawn. And the Golden Dawn was very much like sort of Kabbalistic, esoteric, Rosicrucian kind of stuff. It wasn't like what he ended up with, where, he's summoning Chrononson during like anal sex rituals in the desert or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like he but this is the thing why I always try to advise anybody who's interested in magic to just don't be.
Right.
Stop.
Yeah.
Because so here's the thing that happens, and I think you can see this. You might be able to see this firsthand, or you're going to see it in things that you've read about or so on. Is that you sort of start off and it's just like, hey, I'm going to do like the angelic calls and like the whatever with what's his
Enochian.
name? Yeah, exactly. Like the 49 Enochian calls and the angels, and it's like, and then you start to realize, this is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And then it's just like you go for the easier and the easier payoff. You know what I mean? And and then you just like you find yourself like you've got a Cub Scout hogtied in the the back trunk of your car, and you take them to like
Jesus Christ.
you're cubbing out in the cornfield somewhere, and you're gonna like offer them up to like Azazel or something. It's just like it's like it's the ultimate slippery slope. So it's just like, that's it, man. Just like anytime somebody says, "Oh, I'm interested in magic," just say, "No, don't be." Find something else. Find something else to do.
What I would say to someone who says I'm interested in magic, I would say go plant a garden. Go stare at some flowers. There's magic right there.
Or learn how to play a musical instrument.
Exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly.
Or take some mushrooms.
But, so the funny thing is that like I'm thinking about like in my book, the new edition of my book, The Endless American Midnight. Let's put a plug in there.
Ooh.
I'm thinking about like, how we've just become like this despiritualized void, and it's just like this cold, empty, lifeless world that we've created for ourselves. But, like it's just like little things, like just the fact that people used to sing together, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
People used to get together and somebody would have a guitar and they would all sing. Like they didn't feel like, oh, I'm not going to sound as good as Mariah Carey or, Alicia Keys or something. It's just like, let's just together and sing because we enjoy singing together, and it's just like kids would sing in school and they'd sing in church and people would get together and sing around the campfire. I mean, just something like that simple. You know what I mean? Like that basic, where you just get together and you sing just like your favorite songs, what I mean? Like you sing like, I don't know, Wonderwall or something. I don't know, like you just sing like, some very simple, easy songs. And it's just like, that is already a quantum leap beyond what we have now.
For
and
sure.
I blame, in a lot of ways, I blame the media, for making people feel like kind of inferior, you know what I mean? Like I want to play guitar and entertain my friends, but all of a sudden, is that even Halen? You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, I'm not going to compete with that. And people start to feel very self-conscious. So it's no longer about like, just, this refreshing experience of just enjoying music with other people. It has to be like, oh, I got to be the best or I'm not going to do it, you know?
Yeah,
and then you just end up watching television.
It's the difference between self-expression and technical proficiency and mixing those two things up.
Right. I mean, you know, if I'm going to go to a concert, I'm paying $25 or $250, however much it is now. I want to see people who know how to play their instruments, right? But if I'm just like sitting around and, you know, playing guitar with my friends or something, it's like, you know, it's just the experience of doing something together, you know, doing something that's other than just watching the game or something. So, I mean, there you go. So, I mean, I don't know. I really believe, and I do hate to say this, is that everything is just going to get crazy worse before it gets better. It's going to get crazy worse, and then we've got to sort of have like, you know, we reach the collective rock bottom before we're going to be able to like start saying like, oh, you know, maybe we should just go back to the way that people used to do things and, you know, not have machines do everything for us and do our thinking for us and all that kind of stuff, you know, and just get back to like just enjoying life with people that you love, you know.
Exactly.
I mean, you don't need to do anything else, you know. I mean, just, you know, you make enough money to sustain your lifestyle, which should be a modest lifestyle, by the way, and just, you know, spend your time doing things that you enjoy and in the company of people that, you know, you enjoy their company and, you know, you enjoy them as people. I mean, it's very easy, you know, but we've somehow gotten away from it. But I think we will get back to it again. I mean, I remember, this is a total aside, but I remember reading about like how like medieval peasants like had so much more time off than anybody working today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they had like a lot of time off, you know, because they plant the crops and then they wait for them to grow before they harvest them. You know what I mean? And then like they would harvest the crops and then, you know, what are you going to do for the rest of the winter? So it's just like,
exactly.
You know what I mean? It's just like, we've just become so, I don't know, just so
passive. It's passive observation as opposed to participatory.
Yeah.
Like we're not participating in life.
It's also denatured, you know, it's also being denatured, you know, like this unnatural life, you know, like a life that just has no connection to nature. I mean, I got to tell you something. Every time I go into the city now, I just feel like, I don't know, it's just like this just dark, cold void, you know? I mean, you can just, I mean, first of all, because, you know, you see all these stores that have closed down and so on. But, you know, I used to go into the city and I used to just vibe on the energy because you just felt like people were alive and everybody's thinking about, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to make this money and I'm going to, you know, like people just seem to be up, and now everybody just seems to be down, and it just seems so cold and empty and dead. It's just, it's a fucking, you know, it's a necropolis now, you know?
Yeah. I lived in New York for 10 years, and living here in the Midwest now, in some of my classes, they're talking about the difference between like a Midwest reality compared to a city reality, and people's perception of what city life is or used to be is so incongruous with what the reality was. Like I used to be able to go to my corner bodega, and if I didn't have any money, the guy would give me credit and I could come back, you know, on Friday when I got paid, and I could, there was a different type of a community there. Like if I went to the local grocery store here, the chain grocery store, and said, hey, I don't have money, like, you know, can you float me for a week? They'd look at me like I was fucking nuts. But I think there's just a reality that the lifeblood of what New York City was has been literally sucked out of it. And
yeah, absolutely.
So people have now moved away to, you know, outlying areas because they just can't handle the environment. I was just reading this article in Psychology Today that said that loudness mitigates loneliness. And the reason people in cities aren't lonely is because of the noise, because there's so much noise. Well, what happens when you take that noise away? Now you have to sit with yourself in what has been created, this dystopia.
Well, it's this, this is a cliche, but it's like, we're at that point in the timeline, and if you look back in any ancient city-state, any ancient civilization, they had always reached sort of this point where, like, people just took off. People just left. Crime and all this other stuff all these problems, plagues, whatever, people would just take off for the hinterlands. And just, it happened with every great city-state, that there's a rise and a fall, and hopefully there's like a rebirth, but we're well into the fall period right now. We are well into, like, we've already passed decline, and now we're into fall. I really honestly believe that. I don't think that these cities are going to come back. I don't think people want that in their lives anymore. I think that we don't really have a shared culture. It used to be, well, like, you wanted to be in New York because that's where the culture was. That's where like the new plays were and the new bands were playing and new books were coming out, art exhibits, whatever. And it's like, there's none of that now. There's none of that. I mean, you have some of that sort of on the fringes, like there's some galleries and stuff in Soho and stuff going on in Brooklyn, but it's nothing like what it used to be. So it's just like, unless you're rich, you can't participate in the culture anymore. You can't afford to go to a Broadway play. It's just so much has been taken away from you. But like I said, I mean, I just think that this is an inevitable part of the process. I think that we're there's the whole idea of the Great Reset, which is going to fail. I mean, I think it's failing now. I don't think these plans are going to work. But I think that then there'll be like a real reset. There'll be a real reset where, like, nature and human consciousness and human needs and everything else is going to reset itself. Everything else is going to just, the fields will lie fallow before, the plants can bloom again. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And I think that's where we're headed towards, Like I said, it's a cyclical thing. So, when I talk about, like, the apocalypse, I mean, people think they get these weird, like, I don't know, ideas that aren't even biblical, by the way. They're all like Hollywood and
sure.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
it's the grand finale.
Yeah, when the Revelation, it's the last chapter is like everything starts over again.
Yeah.
It's just basically, exactly. I mean, Revelation, the apocalypse is a reboot, And again, I've convinced myself, and I'm going to convince others in my next book, that so much of that is all stellar symbolism. But anyhow, this is just where we are. So when I talk about, like, the Sibyl shows up to sing the apocalypse for us, or she already has, I mean, she already sang it for us before anybody even paid attention to it. That's just it's just part of the cycle, And like I said, like, people had no problem with this. I mean, you would talk to philosophers or generals or whomever, any educated person, and be like, well, the Sibyl said this, and they're like, oh, really? Let me think about that. It would be just like, what are you, nuts? That woman just, like, in a cave, just screaming at the top of her lungs about nonsense? What are you, crazy? It's just, that's the way so much of what we experience and so much what we're coming out of and will be left behind, not like the Left Behind movies, but so much that we're going to move past is again, out of the Enlightenment. But the Enlightenment had a very good, the Enlightenment came about because we had, a couple hundred years of religious wars in Europe, where people were just slaughtering each other over, like, the most minute differences. So, I mean, just think of this, like, go to an Anglican mass, right? and then go to a Catholic Mass, right? You know, a traditional Catholic Mass. There's no difference. It's the same exact thing. Those people are killing each other for a long time because, you know what I mean? It's like, no, it's the same.
Exactly.
But really what it was about, it was like who would get the battle really was about who gets the collection plate, you know, who gets access to the money. That's really what it boils down to. But it's just like people would be whipped up in these frenzies over the most minute differences in theology or ethnicity or whatever.
And now we call that Facebook.
Well,
Meta.
I mean, and of course, like wokeness and all this other stuff, all this divide and rule stuff. So
yes, exactly.
You know, but again, it's all happened before.
Yeah.
It has happened before, and it's probably happened before. Like we didn't even know about it. Like, you know, people talk about Atlantis or Lemuria or Mu or something. I mean, I don't know about any of that stuff, but I'm saying it just wouldn't surprise me if these cycles that we're talking about and we're discussing now go back before people started writing the stuff down in a way that we could find it and read it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there you go.
Like the Hindus would call it Kali Yuga. Like we're in the part of the pendulum swing that's going into the darkness before we go back around into another age, another chapter. We're fertilizing the ground for the new thing to come after us. And I don't mean like the human race, but existence.
Well, I'll tell you something. If you learn how to deal with it, it's very interesting. You know, it's not always fun and it can be stressful and anxiety making, but it's always interesting. You know, if you look at it in these contexts, and when you start to just plug things in, if you just live in, of course, the Endless American Midnight on sale now, 2022 edition, right? No, but, you know, because what I talk about over and over again in that book is just like this despiritualized, dead, mechanistic, scientistic graveyard that we're all living in, you know? Exactly. And how much it, like, you know, one of the things I talk about a lot, and people have probably heard me talk a lot, is like how much of this like scientism and all this transhumanism and all this nonsense was all Jeffrey Epstein. Like he was like this sci-fi freak who thought that he gave all these people enough money, they would be able to like make him immortal, and so he'd save his head and his dick, you know, and put it in a jar or something. I mean, that's literally what he wanted to do. Or he would reseed the human race with like, you know, his DNA. I mean, just all this nutty, stupid stuff. But it's like people fell for it. And people fell for like all this like, oh, we're going to go land on Mars and build colonies and just all this stupid Star Trek nonsense and everything like that. And it's just like... You know, we've all just been conditioned. We've been conditioned by propaganda that all has an agenda. You know what I mean? Right. It all has an agenda, but the agenda itself, I mean, so here's another thing that I say. It's like, okay, so we know like, you know, this whole reset, World Economic Forum, Bill Gates. I mean, we know all this stuff is like, it's crazy, right? And we know it's evil. But most people don't stop to think is like, maybe this stuff is stupid. You know what I mean? Like, maybe this stuff is fucking stupid. You know, we know it's crazy and we know it's evil, but what if it's actually stupid? Yeah. And it's like, that's really the way I think about it. You know, I mean, it's just like, I think that this stuff, just because you somehow got a lot of money because, you know, what you were doing was advantageous to the national security state, doesn't mean that, you know, you're not stupid. It just means like maybe you're just good at math or something, you know, or you just you just had an idea that, you know, whatever. But it's just like, I really do believe that like all these stuff is like, it's just stupid. It's not going to work. All this technocratic stuff, it's just based on this false idea of progression. That's really just like, it's just a mirror image of the whole idea of like predestination and you know, this whole idea of like everything is working on this timeline, you know, to this revelation and so on. I mean, it's really just like Christian dispensationalism de-Christianized, you know what I mean? But it's the same thinking, you know, it's the same concept, but it's just, it tries to put science in like the, you know, in the throne, you know, like it enthrones the scientific idea that, you know, even though science is just, when you really get down to it, science is just a form of measurement. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it really is.
For sure.
Science is just a way to measure things. I mean, really, like if you really want to get down to the very, very basics of it, it's like science is a ruler. So it's like, are you going to worship that ruler? Really?
Right.
Like
Exactly.
that's what you're going to do? Because you might as well.
They're putting the science on that throne that you talked about that religion used to occupy, or spirituality. So, and it doesn't work that way. It doesn't translate. Those two things don't translate.
No, they don't. And again, like this is where we're going to, you know, find ourselves in a world of hurt, so to speak, before we can, you know, relearn those lessons. You know, it reminds me kind of almost like an alcoholic or a junkie, you know. I mean, people were saying, you know, people watching somebody lapse into addiction, like, hey, man, you better stop that. You know, you better stop that. And they're like,
Right.
oh, fuck you, I can handle it. I know what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. And then you hit rock bottom, and they're just like, oh, maybe I should have listened to those people. And it's going to be the same thing. You know, maybe we should have listened to all these seers and these sages and these prophets and these sybils, you know, all along before we're going to end up where we're going to end up. But I just think it's human nature that it's just inevitable. You know, we never listen until it's too late. And we never have.
So if you peel all of these layers back and you just sit with yourself, Chris, are you happy not with the world and where the world is, but with yourself and your immediate environment?
And your dog.
I think that well, dogs just make everything better. I went through some really hard times, right? And some real bad stuff. And it's interesting too, because a lot of it sort of started to turn around shortly before Chris Cornell died. But a lot of it, you know, I mean, I was using Elizabeth to sort of like that was my new drug. You know what I mean? Was that voice? You know, that voice was helping me get on the straight and narrow, and then I just, you know, I reconnected with like the natural world, which is really important, and you just realize that like it's just so full of magic and wonder that people just aren't even paying attention to, and it's like I really do consider myself now like a mystic, you know. So like there's the whole idea of synchromystic, and
Yeah.
I think people just don't really think as much about how, you know, you've got to think about what the mystic entails. And, you know, I do feel like I'm back in touch with that mystical side of myself that, you know, that I had when I was younger and I lost for quite some time and I've regained. So,
Fantastic.
you know, yeah, I mean, it's, I mean, I feel like I'm in a better place now than I've been in a very long time. And luckily it seems to be sustaining itself too. You know, it's like, you know, when you've been through like hard times for a long time, like you get this sort of like catastrophism in your head. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I'm just waiting for like the bottom to fall out. But
yeah.
So far, so good.
Well, maybe that's you kind of slipping away from that dark resonance and closer to that higher frequency.
Yeah, I hope so. But here's the thing, though. It's like, you know, I don't want to sort of present this sort of like new agey or like Hallmark card, you know, vision of like a mystical consciousness, because you know, you get the full breakfast, right?
Sure.
You know, you get the whole buffet. But I think on the whole, it's a good place to be. I think it's a good place to be. And plus, if you want to read all about this, the Endless American Midnight 2022 edition is available now. So there you
Yes. I'm going to get mine.
Sneak that in one more time.
You should get yours.
I love it.
I read it, the old edition, and I loved it. So I'm definitely going to get the upgraded edition for sure.
Well, I'll let people know right now is that I'm going to be floating a special offer for people who bought the first edition, that they can buy the new edition at a very greatly reduced price. So.
All right. I love it.
Thank you so much, Chris, for this. I feel so tapped into all of the things that you talked about. I took a tremendous amount of notes, and I'm so excited to follow up on some of the things that you mentioned. And I would love for you to send us some of those lyrics so we could take a look. It's really incredible.
And what's that? Well, what's the program that you use to separate the vocals out? You can get back to me on that.
Yeah, it's like it's something as dopey as like vocal remover or something.
Gotcha. What were you going to say?
I don't remember what I was going to say.
Oh shit! Damn me.
Yeah. You broke my flow.
Fudge sickles.
What's that?
I said fudge sickles.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, but it's interesting because a lot of the lyrics, once you sort of establish like a basic narrative, like we've in my group, we've sort of taken all like these little shards of information that we have, and we sort of put together this basic narrative. So once we have this sort of basic narrative, decoding the lyrics becomes a lot easier because you start to get a sense of like what her thinking is and what she's talking about and what her interests are and what her experiences are. So there you go.
Cool. So what group you're talking about is for the Patreon members?
No, this is my little clubhouse, my secret clubhouse.
Oh,
I love it.
How do you gain access to that?
We can talk about it.
Okay. All right.
You just
On
have
a full moon.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll be in touch.
Well, do we get decoder rings?
A secret knock?
Maybe. We'll see.
I love
you
it.
enigmatic god, you.
Yes, thank you.
You are a mystic. I like it.
There you go. You've been mystified.
Well, Chris, thanks so much for chatting once again. It's been brilliant, and I'm sure it won't be the last time.
Excellent.
Yeah, let's do it again. Have a wonderful... Oh, yeah, send people someplace. You have a blog, The Secret Sun.
Yeah,
Where can people find it?
secretsun.blogspot.com.
Cool. Any other place you'd like to send people?
Of course. The new edition of the Endless American Midnight.
Now
on sale on Amazon.
Cool. Okay.
At all fine Amazons in your area.
At a computer near you.
400 pages of mystical ruminations. So there you go.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, sir. Pleasant travels, and until we meet again, take care of yourself.
Yeah, have a great holiday.
Yes.
Thank you.
However you manifest that.
That's right. And a happy new year.
And plus, I'm a grandfather, too. I don't know.
Yeah.
Mazel
Congratulations.
tov. That's incredible.
That's incredible.
Yes,
All right. Well, we'll chat again in the future, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care.
Holy mackerel. Wow. That was incredible.
It was incredible. You should expect nothing less than incredible from Mr. Knowles.
He is a encyclopedia of dot connecting.
For sure. I wish I had 1/10 of his memory and vast archive in his brain. I can't access all of that stuff. You're very good at that too. I can't access all of that stuff in my mind.
I do feel really relieved knowing that he considers Elizabeth Fraser a benevolent force and not a malevolent force, because I was very attached to her music as I was growing up, and feel very connected to her and her music. And so that's a big relief.
Yeah. Yeah. Both Hunter and I are avid Cocteau Twins fans from way back. I think the first Cocteau Twins album, actually, no, the first one that I heard was Pink Opaque. And it took me a bit to realize that that wasn't a proper album, but sort of a compilation of different things. And then I think I started at the beginning, which was, why can't I think of the name of the first album?
You've blocked it out.
Can you remember?
You've blocked its magic out. I can remember it if I go it really quickly.
I can see it in my mind. I can see the album cover perfectly. I can name songs off of it. But for fuck's sake, I can't remember what the name of the album is. But yeah. So, and another thing that we forgot to mention too, unless you talked about it while I slipped out to go to the bathroom, is that what was I going to say? Oh, that Elizabeth Fraser, when she was recording with This Mortal Coil,
Garlands,
of course.
Yes.
Was recording with This Mortal Coil, which was a sort of a 4AD house band, did a cover version of a song by Jeff Buckley's dad, Tim Buckley, Song of the Siren. And Siren, again, playing into the mythology of everything that we were talking about tonight.
So anyone that's interested in Cocteau Twins discography, first album, of course, Garlands, second, Head Over Heels, third, Treasure, fourth, Victoria Land, another one of my favorites.
You got to look at the list. I can name them without that.
Fifth, Bluebell Knoll.
This is not counting the EPs.
Sixth, Heaven or Las Vegas. Seventh, Four Calendar Cafe. And then their last album, which is Chris's least favorite, but I still found value in it, is Milk and Kisses.
Yeah. Even Heaven and Las Vegas. I think that's their last really good album. But it's not like the stuff like Head Over Heels and Treasure and those EPs that came out around that time, the great Spangle Maker and
Pink Opaque.
No.
Oh, and we can't forget the box set.
The box set. That was fantastic. That was I've had one credit card in my life. And the first purchase that I made on it back in whenever that came out, the early 90s, was the Cocteau Twins box set.
91 is when that box set came out for Cocteau Twins fans.
It was good.
It was good. My best friend Marina had it, and I absolutely coveted that box set. I loved it.
It was pretty.
It was pretty.
So yeah, it was a great conversation. It was really an excuse to talk to Chris about the Liz Fraser and Jeff Buckley thing that I wanted to know more about after hearing about it on Higher Side Chats. But I thought it was an interesting inroads to do it via Astroworld and Travis Scott. So the web spreads far and wide.
What I really love is we got an exclusive from Chris when he delved into the PJ Harvey connection, another person in the music industry whose music I really love. And he had a little bit of a dark take on PJ. And I found that really fascinating because it does make you maybe take a look at someone's lyrics and, dive a little bit deeper into what they're saying and not just listen kind of passively. So I'll definitely go back and take another listen to Bring You My Love, which I absolutely love that album of PJ's.
Yeah, it's my favorite album by her. Yeah, it was interesting too to hear those first Higher Side Chat episodes too, and to hear all this stuff about her and the Cocteau Twins, because I had held them near and dear to my heart for years, probably about 20 years up until that point, probably more than that. I don't have time to do the math in my head right now out loud and embarrass myself by how long it takes to actually come up with that number. But to hear all these extra added layers about the music and about the lyrics and about the juxtapositions and her relationship with Jeff Buckley, which I wasn't familiar with before hearing that. It was really nuts. It was incredible. It was just like, stumbling on a trapdoor in an attic, which really doesn't make sense because the trapdoor would just go into a room below it. But just go with it. And then an attic that you've been in several times before throughout the last few decades. And then you stumble upon this extra added compartment that has all this information and stuff in it. And yeah, I just thought it was mind blowing.
You have done what I do to Dead Can Dance. You have added a V where it does not belong.
I know. That shows you how drowsy I am. I do it all the time.
I also have to point out that, one thing I found really, really fascinating is all of these dots that Chris connects with things that I was very, very ripe and sponge-like and absorbed when I was quite a youngster. Philip K. Dick, Cocteau Twins, Buckley, like these were all musicians and artists and filmmakers and films and books that heavily, heavily influenced me. And so to have someone be able to take what I would consider like a 30,000 degree perspective and kind of an elevated viewpoint of something and be able to see all of these things that overlap and connect is so fascinating. And it just shows us what a brilliant mind that Chris Knowles has, that he's capable of doing that. And I don't feel like a lazy, passive listener, but it does make me want to go back and revisit all of these things with, a different lens.
Yeah. And I'm glad you wrote down those movie titles, because that one that he was talking about the angel and the song sounds really cool.
A dark song. Look it up. We're going to look it up. We will definitely
race you. Hunt
that film down. And, I look forward to kind of diving into sacredsun.blogspot.com.
Secret Sun.
Secret Sun.
You can't read your own writing.
Why do I feel like it's sacred? Secretsun.blogspot.com. Because he does give you a dearth of information, and that can be a lot when you're a interviewer to kind of keep track of. But the other thing that he mentioned was Buckley's album Grace, which I I just adore Jeff Buckley, and so I'm definitely going to give that a fresh listen with fresh ears, clean ears.
Mm-hmm. And he always puts links to video clips and stuff like that, audio clips, and so it's kind of a multimedia experience. So I highly suggest it.
Yeah, I had this weird thing with Cocteau Twins, and especially with Liz Fraser, where I almost didn't want to know anything about her. I didn't want to kind of do the investigative reporting on her for my own edification, to figure out who she was and what her life was. So I know very little about her. I really wanted to kind of keep this pure relationship with the music and not necessarily deify her, but just keep it on a professional level. You could say. I did see them in concert in Chicago in 1991, which was absolutely fantastic and really incredible experience to hear them live. But I just always wanted to I had this very private relationship with the music, so I always felt very protective of it. And they were the type of band where if you knew them or you knew about them, then you were cool with me. Like that was kind of my litmus test of friendship with certain people, was if they knew about Cocteau Twins. And so now to hear that, like, people like The Weeknd and Katy Perry and, these rappers are into her music or know about her music is so surreal to me because it's so dichotomous, it's a leap.
Yeah.
But good on them. They deserve good music too. Maybe it will help them creatively. Maybe they can bite some of her style and it'll help them make better music.
Yeah, if you go to Secret Sun and look up the Travis Scott stuff, there is actually some links to, well, not links, you can just watch the videos right there of Liz Fraser and her, a couple of collaborations that she did with a French composer named Jan Tiersen, who did the soundtrack to our favorite movie, Amelie.
Oh,
yeah.
I like it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also going to check out Adam Curtis. That sounds interesting. The whole millennial event that Chris was talking about. That sounds really fascinating too.
Yeah.
I believe I saw like a photo of that event, but I've never heard her sing at that event. So that will be cool to check out too.
Yeah. So thank you all for listening and getting up to this point. We appreciate your ears and your minds, and hopefully you've learned some new stuff or maybe some new layers to things that you already knew. And I just want to remind everybody, it's not in the plug and the closing theme, that one of the benefits of becoming a Patreon member is attending monthly meetups that we have. And they've been really wonderful the last couple of months. We've only been doing it for a couple of months, but very, very beneficial, very positive, very therapeutic, and just really nice to get together and talk with like-minded people. And I've begun recording them and releasing them as episodes to Patreon members. So if that sounds like something that you'd like to be a part of, plus you also get access to bonus episodes that the public does not get access to, not just the last half of an interview, but a complete interview in and of itself. You can go to patreon.com/themeltpodcast, and for $3 and up, whatever you think it's worth, you can participate. So yeah, and also help us make this a better podcast and ideally make it a living where I would love to treat this as a full-time endeavor and not have to, do all the stuff that I've done for money throughout the years.
I know he's selling plasma now, guys. Come on, help
I'm
us
selling
out
our
here.
dog's plasma. I'm not. She would never let me do that.
I also want to suggest if anyone out there has any information to add to Chris Knowles' research that he's done about Cocteau Twins or Liz Fraser, please send us a line, because we are so fascinated by this stuff, and it would be really great if you had song lyrics that you had identified or were interested in sharing your perceptions of. We would love to hear those. So please pass on anything that you have that you feel like Chris and I would be interested in at the Melt Podcast at protonmail.com.
Or if you want Hunter in particular,
Hunter Muse or Hunter-Muse at protonmail.com.
And also, I think I'm inspired to make a, I don't know what it's called in Discord terms, a channel, a sub-channel, something like that, of everything Liz Fraser.
Yeah.
So, and you can get to that by going to themeltpodcast.com, and there's a little, in the menu on the top of the page, it says Discord chats. Just click that and you will have access to that.
And we're working on getting one of the gentlemen from 23 Envelope to be on the Melt. So fingers crossed that will happen sometime at the beginning of 2022.
It might be a little, he said a year, and I don't remember exactly when I talked to him, but he basically said that he would.
I'm willing it to happen.
Nigel Grierson. So
let's call Nigel Grierson into the Melt podcast.
Yes. All right. Thank you all for listening, and we appreciate you. And until next time, take care and be all you can be. I was going to say be safe.
Don't be
safe. No.
Be yourself.
Yes, exactly.
Be free.
You do you.
Farewell.
All right. Ta-ta. If you've liked what you've heard and would like to contribute to The Melt, there are a few ways that you can do that. The most tangible would be financially. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and there you will find ways that you can contribute for as little as $3 a month. This will give you access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. Contributing financially will also help make The Melt better, pay the bills, and help to make this podcast a full-time endeavor that I can fully devote my time to and provide you with more content. Another way of contributing would be to go to wherever it is that you subscribe to The Melt and give it a favorable review or rating, and this will help it to reach more people. You can also spread the word to friends and family via social media, email, or word of mouth. And lastly, if none of those options are readily available or appealing to you, simply send your positive thoughts and intentions. In an interconnected and quantumly entangled multiverse, these also go a long way. Thank you.